Malachi chapter 2, verses 10 through 16 is where we are going to be at. Make sure you have a Bible or you're going through your phone or you're looking with us, okay? Malachi has been interesting, to say the least. It's been back and forth, God's people asking on all sorts of questions, God calling them out, calling them up, and just really kind of just giving it to them. Today, specifically, God is going to call the way the people have been living. Specifically, he's going to call them out on their marriages. And say, and so they have violated the covenant of marriage. They are divorcing one another, and they're marrying people who believe in other gods. Specifically, they're marrying foreign women, foreign men and women, and other nations who do not believe in the Lord, and they're marrying them. And God isn't pleased. God isn't pleased. Now, as I say marriage and divorce, like there's a couple things that pop up with us. There's some of us are perked up and be like, okay, what's he gonna say? What's gonna happen here? What are we gonna unpack? And so you're looking forward to it. The other side, some of us are maybe like probably sink into our seats a little bit. Like, oh man, okay, I'm gonna get a rough one today, or like, oh, he's gonna say something I don't agree with. Well, first and foremost, everything that is said today, it is God's word, God's design, and I don't say that to punk out. I am saying if you got issue with it, I would love to talk with you about it. But at the end of the day, we are sitting under God's authority, and so I submit unto God's authority. In fact, I believe and I agree God's creation and everything. Okay. So as we go into this, I know there's all sorts of feelings. I know there's all sorts of emotions. I know there's all sorts of things that come out because when it comes to marriage, we in the world have redefined marriage. And when we talk about divorce, there's all things that come, like we got feelings and emotions that tug on us because all of us have experienced divorce some way, shape, how in our church. And so, for example, some of us here have parents who have divorced. Some of us here have family who have divorced, friends who have divorced. Some of us here specifically are the ones who have divorced. And so before we go into the text, I want to make sure that we are all on the same page, whether we agree or not on what God has to say here today. First and foremost, marriage. Marriage was created by God for God. It was created by God first and foremost. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So one woman, one man equals one flesh. Look at it this way. When God looks down to a married couple, he does not see Pete and Liz as a married couple. He sees one flesh. They are now one. Jesus says later on in Matthew 19, he says, what God has joined together, let no man separate. Let no man separate. Now, in other words, when it comes to God's definition of marriage, everything outside of one man, one woman is not God's design, simply put. And so you may ask, well, Pete, is polygamy, is that God's design? No, it's not. Is open swingers marriage, is that God's design? It's not. Is homosexuality, is that God's design? It's not. Now, as I say those things, I know the feelings and the emotions that come up with it because the church as a whole has done a terrible job in listening to the world and coming alongside the world, caring for the world, hearing them out, loving the people in that. Yeah, because the church, most of the time when we do that, we think we're allowing this to happen. We're approving it. No, it's not. We could totally love on people and allow them to. And we can totally love on people and love them where they're at and where God will then do the rest. Now, as marriage was created by God, it's also for God. Meaning, when the two become one, they are to be fruitful and multiply and fill this earth with children. Remember, you and I are created in the image of God. I believe Tongans look the most like God, but that's just kind of how it goes. And so we are created to be the image. We are created in the image of God. And so our goal is, not our goal, God's desire is that we would fill this earth with little image bearers. That means godly children. And so we are to raise and disciple our children to know God, love God, and worship God. Why? To fill this earth with God's love. We are to fill this earth with God's love, which gives God the ultimate glory. Now, that's God's design for marriage. Now, anything outside of that, it's our redefinition to God's design. Now, the second thing I want to say is if you have been divorced in the past, if you have had divorce in your personal life, today's message is not a bash on you. If that is in the past, that means I'm assuming you as a Christian, you have confessed and moved on. If you have confessed, God is faithful and just. He has forgiven you. And so if you have divorced, that is the past. I am not bashing you today. God is not bashing you today for what has happened in the past. You have confessed your sins, and God is faithful and just to forgive you. You move forward. Now, everything today that we talk about divorce and marriage, the hope is that we would stake a claim in today, and as we move forward, we would hold up marriage. We would strengthen marriage. We would guard God's design in marriage. Okay? Lastly, the last thing I want to say is, as we talk about folks marrying people from other nations, specifically in the text, God is talking about marrying others who are non-believers. He's not talking about interracial marriage. Okay, interracial marriages are allowed by God. Here he's specifically talking about when a believer marries a non-believer. And in this case, the non-believers were folks from other nations. And so when we talk about that later on, he's not talking about interracial marriage. Now, just to clarify, God is not against interracial marriage. If so, Liz is in sin. And so, all right, cool. All right, Malachi chapter 2. All right, Malachi chapter 2. As you open up to that, there are two issues that we've talked about already that he's going to bring up today. The first issue is the men are marrying foreign women. Okay, this has been something that has haunted Israel from the very beginning, and it's still here in Malachi's time. The second issue is the divorce. It's among them. It's happening among them. Now, if you probably just walked in, you're probably like, man, that sounds like today. People marrying non-believers and divorce is rampant in the church. It is rampant in the church. It is rampant in the church. There's so many times where I sit down with people and want to counsel them or just like, hey, do premarital counseling. It's evident there's a non-believer. I have taken a stance where I will not marry a couple that one's a non-believer and one's a believer. And so I've had to tell family friends, sorry, I'm not going to marry you. This is what I believe. Because at the end of the day, when you have children, when all that stuff happens, and you are on two different ends of the spectrum, that's two different parents parenting children, you're going to go all the way out there. And it's just a mess. And I don't say it so that I could be a jerk or anything. I say it because I think my heart is for their marriage. And so that's what's going on here. That's what's happening in the people of Malachi. So you guys ready? Verse 10. Malachi begins with, have we not all one Father? Has not one God created us? Why then are we faithless to one another, profaning the covenant of our fathers? Malachi begins with a series of questions, and to paraphrase it, in a way he's saying, like, aren't we all his people? Like, isn't God the one who created us? Like, isn't it like, well, why is all this drama between us? Like, why are we disobeying him? Malachi opens up with a series of questions which naturally allows us to ask questions like, what's he talking about? Look at verse 11. Judah has been faithless, and the abomination has been committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah has profaned the sanctuary of the Lord, which he loves, and has married the daughter of a foreign god. So first what we notice here is that he's asking questions. There's faithless. There's something happening here. But then he says Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. Malachi names these three places as a figure of speech because he wants everybody to listen who's hearing this. He wants everybody to see, like, man, this is happening everywhere. Like, this is happening everywhere. Judah, Jerusalem, Israel, this is sin issue, this treachery, it's happening everywhere, which means they knew what marriage was and what marriage wasn't. And these people broke the covenant. And by breaking the covenant, they were faithless. They allowed drama to come into the home. They allowed drama to come into the marriage. And they disobeyed God. And they married non-believers. Now, just to kind of like, you're like, man, why doesn't God allow them to marry non-believers? Let's back up about 1,000 years. Right before they walked into the promised land, Moses speaks to Joshua and the people. He says in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 3, he says, you shall not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons. Here's the key. For they will turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods. Moses didn't want them marrying the foreigners who don't believe in the same God because they will turn them away from God. When you and I, when you unite in your marriage with somebody, we know and understand that we begin to share similar beliefs. We share some thoughts. And that's normally a good thing, right? That we become one. But it's not a good thing when a non-believer influences a believer to reject God and worship an idol. This is what's happening here in Malachi. And the truth is, in our day today, more often than not, the non-believer influences the believer. Paul warns the Christians in 2 Corinthians. He says, do not be unequally yoked with an unbeliever. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness, or what fellowship has light with darkness? Here in the book of Malachi, the people are violating that very covenant. Israel men are marrying foreign women, women who do not believe in the Lord, women who worship other idols, and they are influencing the men away from God, profaning the sanctuary of the Lord. And that's impacting their faith, and that's impacting their home life. And what I mean by that is sin now enters into the house. When sin enters in the house, idolatry was in the house, God is put aside, and it brings drama. Drama. There's drama amongst family members. There's drama in the workplaces. There's drama when it comes to parenting later on when you have children. When you have a non-believer and a believer. All of this is happening in the homes here in Malachi. That's why, if you go all the way back to Malachi chapter 1, that's why they're bringing their worship to the Lord. That's why they're half-hearted. That's why they're just kind of bringing their worthless worship to God, because God is not their focus. They have been led astray. And so they've been showing up, giving their leftovers, like, here, God, here's my thing. They're kind of falling into the mundane routine of worship. It's become a tradition, so to speak. And they've gotten used to just putting up a face, acting as everything is good, profaning the sanctuary of the Lord. And look at what Malachi says in verse 12. He says, may the Lord cut off the tenth of Jacob, any descendant of the man who does this, who brings an offering to the Lord of hosts. Like, God is serious about this marriage thing and not marrying non-believers. So serious, he says, if you violate this, I'm going to cut you off. Numbers 25, men married women from Moab, and that brought a curse unto the people. 1 Kings chapter 11, Solomon married foreign women who took his heart away from God. 1 Kings 16, Ahab married Jezebel, a foreign woman who brought depths of depravity to Israel. And so to marry a non-believer, here the text says, sure, but you'll be cut off. You'll be cut off. That's what's happening here in this text. Look at verse 13. The men are literally divorcing the women, and they're marrying the foreign women. And look at what it says here in verse 13. And this second thing you do, you cover the Lord's altar with tears, with weeping and groaning, because he no longer regards the offering or accepts it with favor from your hand. Like, wait, what? Like, let's read it again. You cover the Lord's altar with tears, with weeping and groaning? Like, what? Who's Malachi talking about here? Like, we naturally would think, oh, it's the women because the men, divorced them. And so the women are at the altar of the Lord crying, groaning, and weeping. But look at the end of verse 13. It says, no, God no longer regards the offering or accepts it with favor from your hand. It's the men. Because the men have divorced the women, they're married the non-believing women. They're showing up to offer their worship. They're giving their offerings to the Lord. They're bringing their half-hearted worship to God. And God isn't accepting it. He's not accepting what they're bringing. He's cutting them off. And because he's cut them off, they are no longer being blessed. And so here they're crying about it. They're pitching a hissy fit. And their tears are covering the altar. Look at verse 14. Because the Lord was witness between you and the wife of your youth, to whom you have been faithless, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant. Like, God is a witness to your marriage. Like, he has seen you marry the girl that you've been jonesing for since a young age. The one that you wanted to date since junior high, the one that you have dated since high school, the one that you actually married her. God has been witness to this. The girl that you are now one with, the one that you have a covenant with. God is a witness to that. Yet you have been faithless to her. Faithless to her. Verse 15. Did he not make them one with a portion of their spirit and their union? And what was the one God seeking? Godly offspring. Again, the series of questions. You have been faithless. But didn't he make you one? Like, didn't God bring you guys together with one flesh, with his spirit? Didn't he unite the two of you become one? What happened? And then from this union of one, what is God seeking? Here that says godly offspring, children. As the man departs from his father and mother, he becomes one with his wife. And God's intention with that is that they would be fruitful. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. So they are to fill the earth with little image bearers, spreading God's love, rule, and glory throughout the whole earth. And you can only have godly children from godly marriages. If you don't have a godly marriage, it's really hard. I'm not saying that's impossible, but it's hard to raise godly children. But when you do, God is glorified. So what he says here, marry, have children, disciple, fill the earth with godly children. Why? So that God's love and God's glory will be made much of. Fill this earth of his love. That's God's design. That's God's desire here. That's his design and his desire here. Simple, easy. But you have been faithless. Faithless means like you've been cheated. You have cheated your spouse, your wife, your husband. Look at verse 16. For the man who does not love his wife, obviously if they're faithless, they're cheating on them, but divorces her, says the Lord, the God of Israel, covers his garment with violence, says the Lord of hosts. God hates divorce. He loves the people, but he hates divorce. When a man divorces his wife, here the text reads that he covers his garment with violence. What does that mean? Like he covers his garment with violence. Back in the Bible times, in the marriage ceremony, it would involve a husband taking a garment and covering his wife, and it would symbolize protection and provision. That garment could be over both of them, and it will symbolize protection and provision. The way we do it today is we actually have the ceremony where there's a transition from the father to the husband. And so the way it happens is the daughter should always walk on the right side of the dad. Always. Here's why. She's on the right side of the dad. The dad's protection and provision is still over the daughter. And so as they walk down the aisle, she is on the right side. Here, can I use you guys? Come on up, Moses. We'll practice for you. You too, Moses. You too. Yeah. So you come on this side, you walk on the right side, yeah. Sure. Right there. She is still under the protection and the provision of dad. So as they walk down the aisle, she's still under the protection and the provision of dad. Now, as you come up, and let's just say there's a guy here, he's pretending, not yet, sorry. Sorry, he's not getting married. Yeah. So he's got, hey, who gives his wife? Okay, then the groom will come up and he'll take his left arm and he'll open it up and then she'll grab it. And then so they'll stand right here. And then dad will sit down, okay? So throughout the ceremony, she's always on the left side of the groom. Now, as the ceremony goes, they're going to eventually turn and face each other. And then eventually turn when the ceremony is done. She is now on the right side. The transition of the protection and the provision has now turned from the father to the husband. Thank you so much. Let's give her a hand. Yeah, good job. This is how it's done now in our days. And so like that's the transition of the protection of the garment. Here he says the garment, it will be covered with violence. What does that mean? It's a literal phrase that means divorce is going to bring misery, pain, havoc between the two. The family and the kids, everything's going to be thrown off. Spiritually and physically, people are going to suffer. Fellowship is going to be broken. Family dinners become awkward. Holidays become weird, especially when kids are involved. Children, like kids' events, school events. What do we do? Do we invite them or things like that? Birthday parties. Everything becomes awkward. Violence on the garment. The covenant is broken. This is why God hates divorce. Because it breaks the fellowship. When he looks down and he sees the one, when there's divorce, it breaks the one. Now there's two again. That's why he does not like divorce. Now again, let me say this. If you have been divorced in the past and now you have remarried and moved on, I know you have confessed. I know you have moved on. God is faithful and just. Now in your marriage, you do everything from now on to never be divorced again. Here, divorce overall, it breaks the fellowship. Think about it when issues happen within the church family. And that's broken. It just becomes weird, right? You see each other at Costco and you're like, oh, we used to go to church together. Like, you kind of say hi, you know what I mean? Like that's how it is. And you guys know what I'm talking about. Some of you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. That's what God dislikes when fellowship is broken. Church, I think God is pretty clear here in verses 10 through 16 what marriage is. He wants us specifically to marry believers. Believers. Now, let me clarify. Not perfect. Okay? You're never going to find a perfect believer. I can guarantee you that. But he'd like us to marry others that believe in Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. And notice I said Jesus Christ, not just God, because God is, there's all definitions. Oh yeah, I believe in God. And then there's all sorts of stuff out there. No, you believe in Jesus Christ. And so that's why I do premarital counseling with people. And part of that is finding out, are they believers? And if they're not believers, then I ask questions. I just did a couple's marriage about a month ago. And just asked them questions. And it's come to find out they were believers. They were just super young and didn't know much about it. I'm like, dude, this is great. And so our biblical counseling, for marriage counseling, we had the whiteboard and we're talking about the creation and all that. And they're sitting there like, oh my goodness, we didn't know marriage was just grand. We just thought it was just a piece of paper. And I was like, no, man, it's so much more beautiful. And then when we did the ceremony, I was like, no, you go on the right side. And they're like just explaining all that. I was like, oh, like, so good. Marriage is much more than just a piece of paper. It was created by God, for God. And when divorce happens, God hates it because it breaks the fellowship. Now, to end this, look back at verse 15. It's like, how do we then now live with this text and understand it? Verse 15 says, so guard yourselves in your spirits, and let none of you be faithless to the wife of your youth. Now move back up to verse 16. So guard yourselves in your spirit, and do not be faithless. In other words, protect it. Protect marriage. Secure marriage. Cultivate marriage. How? How? By guarding yourself in your spirit. Meaning, fast forward now to today, if you are married, if you are in a marriage right now, the best way for you to guard, protect, secure, and cultivate your marriage is your personal walk with Jesus Christ, be on point. If you want to guard your marriage, make sure you are seeking Jesus so much so that you are becoming all that Jesus wants you to be, so that you are serving like Christ, thinking like Christ, loving like Christ, so all your spouse experience is you being Christ-like to them. That is how you protect your marriage. You want to guarantee that there's no divorce in your lifetime? Pursue Jesus. Pursue Jesus. And if maybe you're not as strong as your spouse and spiritually, I want you to know that you cannot hang on her coattails or his coattails. You cannot show up to heaven and be like, my wife, man, she was amazing. Like, she was an amazing Christian. Come on, do I get it? No. Because he sees you guys as one, you are one, but your spiritual walk is still yourself, is personal. So know Jesus. It's amazing how many times I meet with couples and I was like, man, like, how's it been, Pete? We're struggling. Pete, this is going on. Pete, this is going on. I'm like, hey, great. Let's put that aside. Like, okay, I know it's not great, but how's your walk with Jesus? It's not there. It's amazing to see how many times our walks with Christ is kicked to the curb first. We punt it because we get so busy with other stuff. Pursue Jesus. Run to Jesus. Now, there's some married folks out here. Today, you got a gut punched. Today, you got punched in the gut because you know for a fact you have been faithless to your wife, that you have been faithless to your husband. You know for a fact that you have cheated on your wife. You have cheated on your husband. You know for a fact that you have lusted after something, coveted after something. You have brought sin into your marriage. And so today, you got punched in the gut. If that is you here today, confess. Confess. Bring it all out to God. Bring it to his feet. Leave it at his feet. Confess, and not only confess, repent. And when I mean repent, you turn away from that very sin and you run the opposite way. And when you do that, you bring some friends, you bring one of the elders, somebody on staff here, spiritually, you run the other way. And here's the thing, you do whatever it takes for you to not go back to that position. You run that way and whatever it takes. So if that means you got to quit doing something extra, you got to stop going to a certain store. You got to cut off some apps on your phone. Whatever it may be, you got to do whatever it takes because you said yes to the marriage. Do whatever it takes. If you've been here and you're the spouse that, I don't want to say perfect because there's no perfect couple, but maybe you're the spouse that maybe hasn't been, you have been faithful. And the other person has been doing all the whatever it is. I want you to know that God sees you too. That God sees the pain. That God sees you up late at night. That God hears you. And as a church, we want to come alongside you too. We want to come alongside you too. We want to hear you. We want to make sure, first and foremost, we want to make sure you're safe. And so if you are the recipient of anything, if you come and meet with me, I'm going to make sure you're safe. And if you're not physically safe, we will make sure you are physically safe. But I want you to know that we want to be here. We want to listen to you. And so as a church, we don't want to just say it. We want to be about it. And so if you're this married couple, if you're the married couple that's struggling, I want you to know as a church, we don't want to just preach this and be like, oh, good luck. No, we want to be about it. And so as elders, we're dedicated to making sure that you get what you need. We're going to shepherd you. We're going to put people around you. We're even willing to make sure you get counseling. And not just any counseling, biblical counseling. And so there's a place that we trust that we'll send you to. Come and talk to us. Now, if you're divorced and remarried, today, your marriage now, from now on, all you're doing is glorifying Jesus. The past is the past. You have confessed, God has forgiven you, you have remarried, you have said yes, and that is it. You are no longer going another route. Focus on Jesus. Focus on Jesus. Become like Jesus, and then your marriage, your current marriage, won't go through anything else. If you're divorced and single, seek his kingdom first. Don't look to date. Don't look to fill in that hole that you have. Don't look to fill it in, but with the gospel. Too many people that I know when they get a divorce or they're looking to date right away, and they do, and then they get married, and just the statistics for those who get married right away, that's even worse for divorce. And so don't even date. Like the whole idea of dating, just don't even do that. Fill in your hole with your life with Jesus Christ, because he wants to be your everything. If he becomes your everything, whatever about the world, you become all that God has created you to be. And lastly, if you're single, you're not single and ready to mingle. Don't ever say that. Seriously. Don't, it's not because we're like single, ready to mingle. No, like you should be single and mingling with Jesus. Like you'd be hanging out with Jesus. Like that's like Jesus should be all who you are about. And here's why: if you are growing and learning and knowing Jesus so much so when this little guy comes from outside the world, when this girl comes like whistling or whatever it may be, you know so much so of who Jesus is that whatever it may be, you're like, that doesn't even sound like you, Jesus. I'm deuces. I'm keeping over here. Seriously. So many times we're single and then we're like, oh, they come and you're just trying stuff out. It's like, no, if you're dating just to date, just so you get free food and stuff like that, that's a waste of time. Like, I get it. I get it. But seriously, don't date. And when you're ready, and I say this with the deepest love, and when you are ready to date, bring them here. Bring them here. Because the people that will give you, and I hope we're that kind of church, and I'm hoping that we will be able to speak truth to you. And if we do bring somebody and we do speak truth to you, I want you to know that people here are not saying stuff just to be miserable so you can have a miserable life. No, we want to make sure that you have an amazing marriage and all that stuff moving forward. And so bring them here. Hide your life so much in Jesus Christ that whoever wants to come and be a part of your life, they have to go through Jesus. Don't mess with the world. And church, can we help out our singles? Can we ask them? We can ask them questions. Hey, you dating anyone? Things like that. That's an okay question. But here's the thing that we shouldn't follow up with. And most of the time we're like, no, I'm not dating somebody. And then most of the time we'll say, oh, it's okay, God's going to bless you soon. As if being single is not a blessing. Seriously. Now I've heard this from singles in our church. Like, oh, I like coming, but people ask me these questions and they make it seem like singleness is like a curse or something. It's not. Paul was single and he was able to glorify Jesus with his life. And so, as we talk about having children and all that, no, there's other ways you can totally live out God's glory in your life. You could totally do that as a single. So as a church, can we help that? Can we make sure that this is a safe place for singles to come? We made a list of singles where there's like 20, over 30 of singles under the age of 30 that come here. But the reason why they come and go, because all we do is see families, which is great, but could we be the open arms and be a church, be like, come here, single lady, I'm going to have you over for dinner. Can we disciple our folks? Can we create space for them? Love on them? Now, if you notice, in every season of life, married or a marriage that struggles, or divorce and married, or divorce and single, or single, every season of life, the push is that we would be more like Christ. The beauty of the gospel, it's for every one of us. I don't know how this lands for you today. I do know this, that God is serious about his covenant that he created, marriage. And he's serious about us just kind of being whatever about it. He doesn't want us to be whatever about it. He wants us to be intentional about it. And so if you're married, be encouraged. Protect marriage. If you're struggling right now, I get it. Let's do this together. Come and tell us. If you're divorced and married, this is your last divorce. Never again. Pursue Jesus. If you're divorced and single, pursue Jesus. Don't look at anybody else. And if you're single, pursue Jesus. Let's pray.